Good evening. I'd like to welcome each one of you to our midweek Bible study. Thank you for being here tonight, especially we want to welcome those of you that are visiting with us, and hope that you'll come back and visit with us again soon, and that you enjoy this time of Bible study and worship tonight. We have a few announcements to make. First, we want to extend our sympathy to Faye Stroop in the death of her husband, Fred Stroop, on May 22nd, following a massive stroke. There will be a memorial service that is scheduled later. We also extend our sympathy to Missy Guthrie in the death of her grandmother, Polly Hancock. Please remember in your prayers 2 events that are coming up here at Creve Hall: the Connect Conference, June 2nd through 5th, and also our Vacation Bible School. You can go to our website, crevehall.org, to get more information and also to sign up to volunteer for both of these events. That's all of our announcements. Now let's join in worship together.
After this song, we'll be led in prayer by Brother Sam Bohannon. You are the words and the music. You are the song that I sing. You are the melody. You are the harmony. Praise your name I will bring. You are the Lord of lords. You are the mighty God. You are the King of all kings. So now I give back to you the song that you gave to me. You are the song that I sing. Oh, you are the words and the music. You are the song that I sing. You are the melody. You are the harmony. Praise your name I will bring. You are the Lord of lords. You are the mighty God. You are the King of all kings. So now I give back to you the song that you gave to me. You are the song that I sing.
Let's pray. God, we thank you for this evening. Thank you for this time we've got to come here together to worship you. We're thankful for the freedom that we have and the safety in order to be able to do that. We ask you be with those who are sick, those who are sad and hurting. I ask you be with those who are not able to be here with us tonight. Please bless our upcoming Connect Conference and VBS. Help them to bring the good news into a hurting world. We ask that you bless our missionaries and their families. Please be with our elders here. Give them wisdom and discernment. Please be with us now as we're heading into class. Be with us through the rest of the week. Thank you for Jesus, and in his name we pray. Amen.
We're going to be singing There's a Fountain Free in just a few moments. That's from Revelation chapter 22, where we've been invited, all of us, to come and drink from the fountain that God offers to us. In Zechariah chapter 13, it talked about a fountain would be offered for sin. There's a fountain free, 'tis for you and me. Let us haste, oh haste to its brink. It's for everybody. Jesus told his disciples, go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. This is a fountain that's for everybody, and the whole world needs it. This is a thirsty world. We're thirsty for things we don't even know about. Look at the traffic on our streets. Where are the people going? Why is it that they get up in the morning and they do the things that they do? We're thirsty. There's things that we desire, and we're not even sure what they are. The world has always tried to fill itself with something to fill the gap that we've left out when we've taken God out of our lives. There's always this empty, thirsty place inside of us. And so we try entertainment, we try drugs, we try alcohol, we try working 80-hour work weeks, we try doing everything to fill that gap. But the one thing the world is really thirsty for, whether it knows it or not, is a relationship with God. And that's what you and I have to offer. More than that, that's what God has to offer. He says, let him who hears say, come, and whoever will, let him take of the water of life freely. Every time we offer an invitation, it's God saying, come and let me fill your thirst. When you look at what he said in John chapter 4, he said, whoever drinks of the water of this well will thirst again. But whoever drinks of the water that I'm giving him will never thirst, and it will become in him a fountain of living water. It's going to pour out. You'll have more than enough. With God, you will have more than enough. That's the kind of God we serve. So if you need him tonight, if you need to be baptized into Christ, if you need to ask for prayer, if you're thirsty for a peace of mind and a clean conscience, this is your invitation. Why don't you come while we stand and sing?
There's a fountain free just for you and me. Let us haste away to this spring. There's a fount of love from the source of love, and he bids us all freely drink. Will you come to the fountain free? Will you come?
All right. Hey, guys. The devotional didn't go as long as it normally does, so we got started about 2 minutes early. That's not too bad. Oh, it's good to see all of you. This is our last time in this to be in this study in Ezra and Nehemiah, and I have enjoyed it, and I kind of hope you've enjoyed it. I've had a good time going through it. I've said it before, but I've never been in a class on Ezra and Nehemiah before, so it's been kind of fun putting this together. We're going to cover these last two chapters, chapters 12 and 13, that I'm calling Dedication, Celebration, and Solutions. We're going to see 4 real problems that Nehemiah is going to face. He's gone back. At one point, he goes back to the king, and then he asks permission to come back to the land. And when he comes back to Jerusalem, he finds 4 specific problems that he deals with very effectively, and we're going to talk about that. But first of all, we'll get to this point on celebration, dedication, and celebration. I want you to look beginning in verse 12. If you look at the first 25, 26 verses, probably, you're going to find that what he's talking about here are the priests and the Levites, and he's giving you kind of a lineage of the priests and Levites. And we're not going to go into all those names. Just let me say that the first 9 verses are the priestly and Levitical families that returned to Jerusalem under Zerubbabel. And he gives you that list of names. And then he talks about the high priest that served from Jeshua, who was that first high priest under Zerubbabel, to Jaddua, and that's verses 10 and 11. And then he brings you down to his present time, where in the days he mentions Joachim, but this is in the days of Nehemiah and Ezra, the heads of the priestly families in those days, and the Levitical families during that same period of time. And so that's what he talks about in those first, and it's worth reading if you're a scholar and want to follow up on all those names and find out how they match with other places. That's great, but I figured today this is just giving you a succession of those priests and Levites all the way down to the days of Nehemiah, and so he's telling you about that and what it is. But beginning in verse 26, they come to the dedication of the wall. It says, now at the dedication of the wall of Jerusalem, they sought out Levites in all their places to bring them to Jerusalem to celebrate the dedication with gladness, both with thanksgivings and singings, with cymbals and stringed instruments and harps. And the sons of the singers gathered together from the countryside around Jerusalem, from the villages of the Netophathites, and from the house of Gilgal, and from the fields of Geba and Asmaveth, for the singers had built themselves villages all around Jerusalem. They dedicated the wall. The word for dedication here is an interesting word in the Greek. It's Hanukkah. Some of you will have seen the Jewish celebration of Hanukkah, and while it doesn't commemorate this particular dedication of the wall, it means dedication. And that word, by the way, for Hanukkah comes in from the present celebration from the time of the Maccabees, when the Maccabees threw out and overthrew the people who had taken over the temple. They cleansed that temple and dedicated it back to God in the days of the Maccabees, and they began that feast called the Feast of Lights, also called Hanukkah. Okay? Now, it was a minor feast for years and years and years, for centuries actually, among the Jewish people, until Western civilizations began to celebrate Christmas, okay? When Western civilizations began to celebrate Christmas, Hanukkah became far more important because it was the Jewish form of Christmas, basically. It came about the same time, and so it became a much more important feast to them in Western nations than it is even today in some of the other areas of the world. But here's the thing, okay? They picked out the Levites and the singers, people who could sing and pray and play on cymbals and stringed instruments and harps to celebrate. That's what they're doing. They're dedicating the wall. The wall has been finished. There's a whole lot that's not finished. The people have now moved into the cities. We talked about that a little bit last week, but there's still a lot of rubble there. There's still a lot. They've come out of comfortable suburban homes and they've moved into a place in the inner city, basically, where they're having to work from scratch through the things that they're doing, put their houses together again, and try to make a go of it here. But one of the things that they will do is to celebrate and dedicate this wall. Now, he's going to talk about how they do that in just a moment. Look at verse 30. Then the priests and the Levites purified themselves and purified the people and the gates and the wall. Now, I don't know, it doesn't tell you how they purified themselves and purified the people and the gates and the walls. There are several things that they probably did. Among other things, they would have offered sin sacrifices, burnt offerings that were for the forgiveness of their sin. But the other thing that they commonly did was to sprinkle the blood of the covenant, or the blood, on the people and on the gates and on the wall as purification. The thing about it is, if you're going to have a dedication, you're going to have to first purify yourself, okay? So there's a principle here that I find really interesting. They're going to dedicate that wall, but the first thing they do is purify themselves. If you are wanting to become serious, and I mean really serious, about serving God every day, you need to take some consideration at the same time for your own personal purity. You're not going to be able to make a great difference in the lives of other people until you've done something about your own. You're going to have to take care of your own sin in order to take care of the things that you need to take care of for the house of God and for the people of God and for the people outside. Take care of that. And so they purified themselves before this dedication took place. And then they began to celebrate. And here's Nehemiah writing. And he says, "So I brought the leaders of Judah up on the wall and appointed 2 large thanksgiving choirs. One went to the right hand on the wall toward the refuse gate." Now, the wall is about at least 9 feet wide, okay? It's a good, solid wall that they've built with good, solid gates. And he says, "I got 2 thanksgiving choirs to come up, and I brought them up on the wall." I don't know how he brought them up on the wall. I assume that there are places, in order for guarding that wall, that there were stairs from the inside that would go up to the top of the wall. I've often thought it would be kind of interesting if they just went up ladders, but at least they went up to the top of the wall with these groups. And he says the first one went to the right hand on the wall toward the refuse gate. That means that they were traveling down toward the south side of the city, okay? So the first Thanksgiving choir goes down toward the bottom of the city, and that's the first one. Now, he tells you who they are in verses 32 through 37, or at least some of the names of who they are. And again, I'm going to skip a lot of those names and get you to, I think, the next part. Just know that there were a lot of people who were in that first Thanksgiving choir. And then verses 38 and 39. The other Thanksgiving choir went the opposite way. And I was behind them with half of the people on the wall. Half of the people, not just the choir, but half the people. The rest of them aren't going to be able to fit. There's too many of them, so they're down inside the city gates. But he says, "I'm walking behind that choir." Who's walking and leading that? Well, it's Ezra. And now Nehemiah is at the back, and he says, "And they're going past the Tower of Ovens as far as the broad wall, and above the gate of Ephraim, above the old gate, above the fish gate, the Tower of Hananel, the Tower of the 100, as far as the sheep gate, and they stopped by the gate of the prison." They went to the north. So you have people spread out from south to north across this wall. And what are they doing? Well, they're singing and they're playing instruments. It's what they're doing, and praising God. This is the way that they're doing it. They are celebrating. I want to tell you that there's a couple of things that I think are missing among religious people often today. One of them is feasting, and the other one is fasting. We've kind of forgotten how to do both. To celebrate, man, look for opportunities to celebrate. I see people all the time who say, we're living in such a terrible world. COVID-19 has just taken out millions of people, and in addition to that, you look at the other stuff that's happening around us in America. We're celebrating from the standpoint of a federal government. We're celebrating things that God calls abominations. We're less likely to keep our word. The morals of people are failing. Everything is coming apart. It's a sad, horrible world. I want to share with you something that I really believe, is that if you go into the world with a long face and a sad countenance and depressed about everything that's going on to you, you're not going to be attracting a lot of people to Jesus Christ, okay? They don't want to be like that. People don't want to live like that. You're not going to make a big difference in the world if that's the way you do. And I'm mindful of the fact that in the New Testament, they were living in a world that's every bit as bad, if not worse, and yet the central theme seems to be they lived in joy. They lived in joy all the time. They found joy in the things that are there. There's things in this world that are worth celebrating. Tonight, I just got to hold the hand of a 7-month-old baby. I'm celebrating that. She smiled at me, and you can't buy that smile. That is just one of the great things in the world. There's lots of things to celebrate. There are people who are still being baptized into Christ. There are people who are willing to give their lives in service to something greater than themselves. And I see it all around us. There's nobility still among people, many of whom are not yet Christians who don't really know. I celebrate those good things that are happening in our world. If you've got a face that looks like you could eat corn out of the bottom of a Coke bottle, you need to think differently, okay? You just need to change your heart. Whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are of good report. Remember, if there's anything virtuous, if there's anything praiseworthy, think on these things, he says in Philippians chapter 4. I need to be thinking in those directions because there's plenty of things to celebrate. There were plenty of things for them to gripe about, okay, that they're in. The city's not rebuilt. There's a lot of, the businesses are just now coming in to the city of Jerusalem. There's economic woes. They're still under the domination of a nation that could take them out at any minute, but they've chosen to celebrate at the wall. Here's one good thing that's happened, and we're going to celebrate that. Find those good things that happen. I've gotten calls through the years in the middle of the night. It wakes me up. Somebody calls me. Sometimes they're members of the congregation where I am. Sometimes they just somehow got my number. And they're talking about suicide. Life is awful. They want to commit suicide. But there's something that I know. They called me, okay? Why did they call me? Because they're trying to find one reason not to commit suicide. One reason. And if you talk to them long enough, you can help them find that one reason. And if they find that one reason, they're not going to commit suicide. They're going to go on and live. Everybody needs to find a reason to celebrate. Everybody does. And so they're celebrating the wall. And all over this wall, north to south, they're just all over the wall celebrating. And it's kind of raucous. I want you to look a little bit further on here in verse 43. After it gave us the names and everything else, now we're coming down again. Also that day they offered great sacrifices and rejoiced, for God had made them rejoice with great joy. The women and the children also rejoiced, so that the joy of Jerusalem was heard afar off. Okay, it's the women, the children, everybody is celebrating on this day. They're caught up in this excitement and celebration about what's happening. Don't think of these people standing on the wall as though it's just a standing service where we're going to stand and we're going to sing quietly, okay? Or we're going to stand and we're going to reverently say whatever it is that we're going to say or do while we're there. It's not your typical church service. This is more like a conga line, okay? And they are yelling and celebrating to the point that you can hear them from way off, okay? Surrounding villages are saying, wow, something great must be going on there. It would be like if you've ever had tickets to a football game and you're getting there a few minutes late after it starts and you're walking up and you start hearing everybody cheering from the inside and you're saying, something good must be happening. I got to find out what it is. That's what it was like here, okay? Years ago, I was asked to preach or teach in a youth rally outside of Birmingham, Alabama. I'll never forget this. I was the keynote speaker, and then they had brought in a singing group from Faulkner University that was really good that year, a really great singing group. And the youth minister got up before we started, and he said, of course you understand that we will not be tapping our feet or clapping our hands because that's instrumental music, so we're not going to do that. And he said, and also, no gyrations here. There won't be any movement in the pew at all. You're just going to sit very still. And at the end of their presentation, I'm going to tell you how to adequately show them your real appreciation. And so they got up and started singing, and I just really love music. And I don't have any rhythm to dance. I can tell you I can't dance, but music makes me move. I don't know why. It just does. We sing here on Sunday mornings and Sunday evenings, and I find it very difficult to sit still sometimes. I'm kind of bouncing in the pew. That does something to me. Music speaks to me, and I enjoy that. And I was gritting my teeth to be still because I didn't want to be a bad example for the rest of the kids. But I was thinking, this is miserable. I'm just miserable sitting here while these great songs are going on and they're singing so well, and it's just miserable. And they did this for about an hour. They sung. It was really a great concert. They did just this amazing thing. And then the youth minister got up and said, now I'm going to show you how we will scripturally show them our appreciation. He said, everybody say with me, amen. And I thought, oh, man, do I feel miserable. That was just nothing like what I wanted to do. And I'm telling you, what's happening here is not like that at all. What's happening here is they're celebrating. They're moving to the music. They're shouting with joy. This is what's going on there at that. And there's some moments where we just need to be people who celebrate and don't worry about how loud we are. When I was living in Cleveland, Tennessee, we had a deacon there that I always loved. His name was Jack Daniel Smith, and he loved his name. He always included the middle name with it whenever he did it. But he was a guy who absolutely loved to sing and had absolutely no talent to do it. He couldn't carry a tune for anything, but oh, did he love to sing. And he never put any kind of volume restraint on his singing. So there would be people who would move out of that section when he was singing, but I can just tell you, nobody loved it more than he did. And I think something about that that's really important is that he knew what it meant to make melody in his heart. And he never apologized for that. Jack has gone on to be with God now, and for the first time in his life, I think he probably can sing on tune. And that's really good. But he had the spirit of it the entire time. And it reminds me of a couple of things here, maybe 3 verses that just come to mind. A merry heart does good like medicine, but a broken spirit dries the bones. There needs to be some happiness, some joy, some celebration in your life. It's important that you eat right. It's important that you exercise. All that's important. But can I tell you something equally important to eating right and exercising is having a merry heart. Okay? Having a merry heart. It actually makes you healthier. I don't know if you've looked at the stress scale or not, but there is a stress scale out there that talks about different transitions that happen in your life and how you're handling them. But if your stress points get up to 300 in any given year, within the next 2 years, you're going to have a major breakdown in your health. Something seriously is going to happen to you if that stress level gets up to a certain point. When you have a broken spirit, it actually hurts your health. Not just your mental health, but your physical health. Your body suffers if you don't have a merry heart. And the next one, a merry heart makes a cheerful countenance, but by sorrow of the heart, the spirit is broken. Okay? Again, that same idea. I want to tell you how you can tell a healthy family as opposed to a family that's not healthy, okay? If you go into a family's home and they never laugh, they never smile, you've just walked into a really unhealthy home. That's just unhealthy. It's bad for them. It's bad for their relationship. It's bad for everything. Show me a family that laughs and smiles and enjoys each other's company, and I show you a family that's a lot healthier. They're just a lot healthier than the other family. A merry heart does that. And then moving into the New Testament, I want to look at Ephesians chapter 5, verses 18 and 19, where he says, don't be drunk with wine, in which is dissipation, but be filled with the Spirit. In other words, if you need to be happy, don't do it the way the world does. They go to the bar, get themselves drunk, and think that makes them happy. And I can't forget this one event. It just stands out in my mind from years and years ago when Beverly and I hadn't been married very long. I was walking down the sidewalk, and there was a guy who was laying in the gutter and had his head propped up against the wheel of an automobile, and he was projectile vomiting. And he held up the bottle that he had been drinking and said, "Try this, it's great." I thought, wow, it's great for you. Tomorrow you're going to hurt. I can just tell you, if you live till tomorrow morning, you're going to feel terrible. There's no real joy in getting drunk. There's no real joy in the drugs. All they do is create a greater thirst for them, and you don't find any joy in it at all. So he says, don't get drunk with wine. And he's comparing what Christians did and their ecstasy, and what I mean by that is their excitement about being Christians, to what the temples were doing, because the temples were drunken orgies, basically, in order to celebrate and find some kind of happiness and joy in the worship of false gods. And he says, don't do it like they do it. That doesn't do anything for you. It destroys you. But be filled with the Spirit, speaking to one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing and making melody in your heart to the Lord. I love that last part, that singing words isn't going to do it by itself. Singing notes isn't going to do it by itself. But singing from your heart, letting your heart sing with the song, that's when worship happens. Great song leaders are leaders who so much feel that song that you're feeling the song with them. You're not just singing words. Everything has meaning to you because he's able to communicate that meaning, and you begin to feel it like he feels it, okay? Singing and making melody in your heart to the Lord. That's what we do. God's looking for us to celebrate. He intends for us to celebrate. But here's the next thing that I want you to notice. I want to go back to verse 43, where it says they rejoiced with great joy, and the men and the women and children rejoiced. And listen to what he says. The joy of Jerusalem was heard from afar off. He didn't say the music was heard from afar off or the songs were heard from afar off. The joy was heard from far off. You know what people hear in us? It's our joy. They hear that. When I have a joyful heart, it communicates to everybody, and people respond to that. They really do. You know that's true. Think about your favorite teacher in high school. What was it that attracted you to that person? It wasn't just that they taught, but they taught with enthusiasm. They taught with real joy in the subject that they were teaching, and that was your favorite teacher. That's who it was. When I went on to Freed Hardeman, one of my favorite teachers at Freed Hardeman was a man named Norman Hogan. Brother Hogan was an amazing person. He loved American history. I mean, he loved American history, to the point that he would be describing a battle scene in the Civil War, and he would say, now we're standing on this hill, and I want you to look to your right because here's what you're going to see. And then here's the panorama in front of you, and here are the people that are leading this one over here. And he never taught American history like, on this date, you need to remember this person and that stuff. I hated history like that, but I loved history as he taught it. Now, I will say this. For a godly man, he had the most hellish tests that I have ever had in my life. You wouldn't think that multiple choice would be that hard, but Brother Hogan's tests were all this way. They were A, B, and C. D is all of the above. F is none of the above. G is A and B of the above. H is A and C of the above. And I is B and C of the above. And if you didn't get them exactly right, you were wrong. That was just the way that was. I hated his test, but I loved his courses. And I would be in there, even though I hated the test, because he was so joyful in the teaching of history. He made it come alive to all of us. I think the most contagious thing on earth is not COVID-19. It's joy, okay? Joy is contagious. It really is. If you're around a happy, joyful person, you tend to become happy. Do you notice that? On the other hand, if you're around just this guy who's down in the dumps all the time, you're unhappy until you get away from him, you know? Some people light up the room coming in. Other people light up the room going out. And if you want to be a person who's attractive to other people and makes a difference in the lives of other people, let your joy be heard. Let it be seen, okay? I've said enough about that. I want to move on. I want to go to chapter 13. But let me just say this. Joy depends on your focus, not on your outward circumstances. What are you focused on? Okay, what are you looking toward? If my view is of all this awful stuff that's going on around me, if my focus is on what I'm reading in the news or hearing on CNN or Fox News or any of the rest of the channels that are telling us all the bad stuff that's happening in the world, then I'm going to find myself not very joyful. But if I'm focusing on the Lord and the fact that He's with us and that He's not deserted us, that He is as powerful today as He's always been, and in the darkest of circumstances, He helps us shine the brightest, all of a sudden, my joy comes in. I'm not defeated. I'm not discouraged. I'm full of joy. All it takes It's you and God to make a difference. Get your focus in the right place and you'll find your joy. All right, now to chapter 13. He mentions 4 problems and their solutions here in chapter 13. And that's what I want to do for just a moment. I want to read out of chapter 13 if I can get to the right translation. Here's the one that I want. Okay, good. All right. What it tells you is there are 4 things that they're having to deal with. The first problem that he runs into is the misuse of the house of God. So look at verses 1 through 9 with me. He says, on that day, that is the day of their celebration, they read from the book of Moses in the hearing of the people, and in it was found written that no Ammonite or Moabite should ever come into the assembly of God, because they had not met the children of Israel with bread and water, but hired Balaam against them to curse them. However, our God turned the curse into a blessing. So it was, when they had heard the law, that they separated all the mixed multitude from Israel. Now before this, Eliashib, the priest, having authority over the storerooms. Now, this is before they even celebrated at the wall. Before this, Eliashib, the priest, having authority over the storerooms of the house of our God, was allied with Tobiah. Now, if you've been reading our book with me, you know that Tobiah is an Ammonite. The Ammonites can't be in the assembly. They can't be in the temple. They can't come in the places where the people worship. And he had prepared him a large room, which previously they had used to store the grain offerings, the frankincense, the articles, the tithes of grain, the new wine, and oil, which were commanded to be given to the Levites and the singers and the gatekeepers, and the offerings for the priest. But during all this, I was not in Jerusalem. He's been back with the king. He says, for in the 32nd year of Artaxerxes, king of Babylon, I had returned to the king. Then after certain days, and we don't know how long that was, I obtained leave from the king, and I came to Jerusalem and discovered the evil that Eliashib had done for Tobiah in the preparing a room for him in the courts of the house of God. And it grieved me bitterly. So what does he do with it? Well, let me say, first of all, the first thing he does is that he gets really upset, okay? He says, it grieved me bitterly. You know what that means? He says, I was sorrowful and angry about what was going on there. I was upset, really upset. I remember back when I was a younger person and Jimmy Carter was president, one of the things that used to be said about President Carter was he should have gotten angry, but he only got miffed. And if he'd gotten more angry, maybe he would have done some things that he didn't do otherwise. Well, in the same way, it's one thing to say, I don't like this. It's another thing to get angry about it, to be really upset about it. I think the closer we are to God, the more upset we get when we see sin among the people of God. He said, it grieved me bitterly. And so what does he do about it? Well, he called a meeting, and they had several study groups to figure out no, that's not what they did at all. He said, therefore I threw out all the household goods of Tobiah out of the room, and I commanded them to cleanse the room, and I brought back into them the articles of the house of God with the grain offering and the frankincense. He says, I dealt with it. And he dealt with it directly. I mean, this is wrong. God said it's wrong. It's not going to happen here. The high priest, though, wait a minute, Eliashib, this priest, is the guy who let him live there. And by the way, they're related in some ways. And he says, but they've let him live there. What are you going to do about it? We're going to throw him out. We're going to throw everything he has out. So Tobiah shows up that night to go back to his, and by the way, if you look at it, it mentions rooms in there, to cleanse the rooms. So apparently he wasn't just given one room, he was given a suite, okay, a place to live in the temple courts. And he says, throw it out. So he gets there that night and nothing's there. It's all out in the street. Now his feelings might be hurt. And guess how much Nehemiah cares about hurting his feelings? He doesn't care at all. He said, he's not going to do this. God said this isn't right, and it isn't right, and we're not going to tolerate it anymore. We're not going to allow that to happen anymore. If you know anything about Ludwig von Beethoven, then you know that early on in life, he began to lose his hearing. He was a prodigy from the time that he was very, very young. He was already playing as a concert organist by the time that he was 7. He was composing things by the time that he was 10. He composed some of the great symphonies that the world has ever known. But in his young days, he began to go deaf. And so that by the time that he was middle-aged, he was completely deaf. Not only did he have that, but he had a disease that caused his fingers, he said, to go heavy. But what it probably was neuropathy. And he was losing his feeling in his fingers, so that when he played, he couldn't feel what he was playing. And if you're a pianist, you know that feeling that means a lot. And he couldn't feel that. But he continued to work. He continued to compose. He continued to play and to try to direct, even though he got to a point where he could not direct symphonies anymore, even though he could write them, because he couldn't hear what they were playing at all. It frustrated him so much on one day that he slammed his fingers down on the keys, and he said, "Life, I will take you by the throat." In other words, you're not getting the best of me. I'm going to get the best of you. I'm going to do it. And he kept composing until the days that he died. That was the way that he lived his life. And I think he got a lot more done because he handled it directly. He said, "I'm not just going to roll over and play dead. I'm going to take this by the throat. I'm going to do something with it." Well, there's a problem. God's house is being misused. And what does Nehemiah do? Well, he took that problem by the throat and he said, "Out. You're out. That's what we're going to do." The misuse of the house of God is one of the problems that was going on among those things. And let me just, how do you apply that to where we are today? God's house is God's people, okay? I want you to think about for a moment being a little ruthless with yourself if you are misusing the house of God. And what do I mean by that? Well, do I refuse to show up? Do I just, when the worship takes place, I can't necessarily be counted on? There was a survey done by a group that does religious surveys among evangelical children of evangelical parents. And if you know something about the evangelicals, that's a broad idea, but generally they are people who do accept the authority of the Word of God and say that they want to live according to the Scriptures. There's a lot of other things that you and I would disagree with, but at least in that they do. But they were interviewing their children. And this is the response among those who considered themselves to be faithful evangelicals. Their children had an entirely different view, which I thought was really interesting. The children said, "My parents say that worshiping God and obeying God are the most important things in life. But we don't think they mean it, because when we have homework, they let us stay home. And when we have sports, they put that over the worship, and we don't go worship, we go to the sports when that happens." And they said, "We really believe that they value our education and our future and our sports more than they value serving God." And that was their kids saying it, okay? We're sending a message to our kids when we say, "Well, yeah, you got some homework. Don't worry about church tonight." We're sending a terrible message to our kids about what's really valuable to us. Somebody says, "Well, we don't mean it." Well, you do. That's the problem, is that you do. Because if you didn't mean that, they would be at worship. I remember years ago, my kids love sports, and they love playing baseball. Tiffany was the only girl in an all-boys league, and the coach hated that, but she was faster and better than anybody else, and so he had to play her, and all the mothers jumped all over him when he wouldn't, so he played her. But when the kids would go, I would tell them at the very first of the season, "I want you to know that I know you have some games on Wednesday nights, that if you have games on Wednesday nights, our services start at 7 o'clock. And the building is just down the street from the field, so we'll be leaving at about 15 till 7. Whether you're in the middle of a game or the game is over or not, we're going to be leaving. Our kids are going to be leaving." And every year, every coach would say, "If you are going to do that, I'm not going to play your kids this year." And every year I'd say, fine, but I'll tell you what they're going to do. They're going to show up and practice every single time. They're going to play their hearts out every time they get the chance, but they won't be here at 7 o'clock on Wednesday nights. And the reason is we're going to be at church. Did you know that there wasn't ever a single coach that didn't play them? They played hard. They worked hard. They didn't, and the coaches came to respect us by the end of the year. by the end of the season. They knew. And in fact, sometimes the game would be really intense, and I'd get caught up in it and forget that it was 15 minutes till 7, and the coach would say, "Isn't it time for y'all to go?" "Oh, yeah. Oh, I would go. And that's what we would do. I think if we would stand up for what we say we really believe and not skip out, God would bless us, and the world would say, this means something to us. The abuse of God's house. I think about the number of folks that I know who at this point, and it hasn't been true all along, but at this point they say, I'm really afraid of COVID, and so I'm keeping my family away. And yet I see them at ball games, and I see them in the grocery store, and I see them at recreational places. I see them in all sorts of places where they're crowded around with people, and yet they can't come to church. Listen, we're sending a message here that we need to start dealing with in our life. There's some things we need to start dealing with. And don't be easy on yourself when you're doing it. Don't misuse God's house. There's the second thing. Let me back up if I can here. That went 2 at a time. Okay, there we go. The second one was failure in their finances when it came to serving God. He said, I also realized that the portions for the Levites had not been given them. For each of the Levites and the singers who did the work had gone back to his field. So I contended with the rulers and said, why is the house of God forsaken? And I gathered them together and set them in their place. Then all Judah brought forth the tithe of the grain and the new wine and the oil to the storehouse. And I appointed as treasurers over the storehouse Shelemiah the priest and Zadok the scribe, and of the Levites Pedaiah, and next to them was Hanan, son of Zakkur, and the son of Mattaniah, for they were considered faithful, and their task was to distribute to their brethren. Remember me, O my God, concerning this, and do not wipe out my good deeds that I've done for the house of my God and for its services. You see, remember not way back, but just about a week ago, we looked at the contract. Remember, they made a covenant with God and they signed it. They actually signed and sealed it and said, we will give the tithe and we will support the temple and we will do all that. And then Nehemiah goes back over to be with King Artaxerxes, and while the cat's away, the mice will play. I'm telling you, they aren't doing it anymore. They signed it and made a solemn promise before God, and they've quit doing it while Nehemiah is gone. And he calls them to it. He says, look, this is something God has said to do. You need to take care of this. And if you're worried about who's going to do it, here's guys everybody here trusts, and they're going to be over that fund. But we're not going to have the Levites and those people who are normally working in the temple having to go out and work in the field when they need to be working in the house of God. You need to be giving what you're supposed to be giving, what you promised to give. There's a lot I would like to say about that, but when it comes to modern day application, okay, how many times do we say, well, I've got a lot of obligations, and there's a whole lot of stuff that I'll do, but if I have anything left over, I promise I'll give that to God. It's the opposite way that God intends for that to be. He intends for it to be, first, I set aside this part for God, and the rest of it, if I can get to it, I will. But this I will not forget. This I will not forsake. And that's what he's having to remind them of, and that's what we need to be reminded of as well. That this is something that God has given me. Everything I have is a gift from God, and this is only a small portion to say back to God. Not that you need it, but that I need to give it to say thank you. Until I learn to be unselfish, then I'm never going to grow in the person that you want me to be. I'll never become the person you want me to be. And after he does this, he prays to God again and says, remember this and remember the things that I've done. I love that. He goes to God in prayer again and again, and this is just another one of those times. The third thing is in verses 15 through 22. Remember again that they made a promise that they would not buy, sell, trade, or allow anyone else to do it on the Sabbath day. And they signed it, and all the people agreed to it and celebrated it. But what happens when he gets back from Artaxerxes? In those days, I saw people. Oh, but can I stop right here? Have you noticed that he said, I found, I saw, I discovered? That's what he does through this whole thing. If you want to be a leader, you have to keep your eyes open, okay? You just have to keep your eyes open. Elders are not just elders and mature, and they're not just shepherds in the sense of pastors or feeding the flock. They are also overseers. And that means that they see. that they see where the flock is. They see where the flock has been. They see where the flock is going. They see what's happening. If you're not seeing what's happening, you can't be a leader. He's seeing. He pays attention to what he does. In those days, I saw people in Judah treading wine presses on the Sabbath and bringing in sheaves and loading donkeys with wine, grapes, figs, and all kinds of burdens, which they brought into Jerusalem on the Sabbath day, and to warn them about the day on which they were selling provisions. Men of Tyre dwelt there also, who brought in fish and all kinds of goods and sold them on the Sabbath to the children of Judah and in Jerusalem. Then I contended with the nobles of Judah. Notice he goes first to the people who are probably the main businessmen anyway. I went to the nobles of Judah and said to them, "What evil thing is this that you do by which you profane the Sabbath day? Did not your fathers do this, and did not our God bring all this disaster on us and on this city? Yet you bring added wrath on Israel by profaning the Sabbath." So it was at the gates of Jerusalem, as it began to be dark before the Sabbath, which is about 6 o'clock on Friday afternoon for us, I commanded the gates to be shut and charged that they must not be opened until after the Sabbath. Then I posted some of my servants at the gate so that no burdens would be brought in on the Sabbath day. Now the merchants and the sellers of all kinds of wares lodged outside Jerusalem once or twice. I like that. They were defying this at least once or twice, he says. Then I warned them and I said to them, "Why do you spend the night around the wall? If you do so again, I will lay hands on you." What does that mean? It means I will arrest you or worse. That's what it means. Okay? You know, when the Bible says lay hands on no man suddenly, I don't think that's what it was talking about here. This is a whole different kind of thing. You guys are going to be beat up or you're going to be arrested. From that time on, they did not come anymore on the Sabbath. And I commanded the Levites that they should cleanse themselves and they should go and guard the gates to sanctify the Sabbath day. Remember me, O God, concerning this also, and spare me according to the greatness of your mercy. He said they were profaning the Sabbath. Now, there is no equivalent of the Sabbath in this age of time, okay? Our Sabbath is heaven. Our Sabbath is the Sabbath rest that remains for the people of God, according to the book of Hebrews. The Sabbath is never on Sunday. The Sabbath was always Saturday. It was celebrating and commemorating that God rested on the Sabbath day, and he intended for his people to rest and to honor him on that day. We don't have a Sabbath day in the New Testament. And so the regulations on the Sabbath day do not apply to us on Sunday. They're not the same thing. Can a person do work on Sunday? Yeah, he can. But there's also something else I need to know about Sunday. It's the Lord's Day. It's the day that I want to remember. It's the day that I want to be faithful to. In our time, the Lord's Day is a time where we honor God, where we worship God, where we encourage one another. And on the Lord's Day, we meet together and we give of our means. We meet together and we sing those songs. We meet together and we recharge what we will be doing for the rest of the week. We put our spirits in a condition to face the world for the rest of the week and what we're doing, and it becomes incredibly important that we do it. I don't want to neglect the Lord's Day, okay? But these were profaning a direct command of God, and also they were violating the very promise that they made and wrote down and signed their names to and said we won't do. They're doing it again. And so he comes back to them and says, stop it, stop it. And then there's a fourth issue that's going on here, and that is that there are unlawful marriages that are happening. In those days I also saw, notice again, he's noticing, I saw Jews who had married women of Ashdod, Ammon, and Moab, and half of their children spoke the language of Ashdod and couldn't speak the language of Judah, but spoke the language of one or the other people. What he's saying is, look, they don't even know how to speak Aramaic or Hebrew. They don't know. So I contended with them. Now notice again, he didn't say what we really need to do is to put together a committee and study what we need to do about this. He doesn't. He said, this is wrong. And so I contended with them. And listen to this. This sounds pretty direct to me. I cursed them. It doesn't mean that he used profanity with them. It means that he said, do you know that by doing this, you're bringing God's wrath down on you, that you are cursed of God for having done this? That's what he tells them. He says, I curse them. And then he goes on to say, and I pulled out their hair and made them swear by God, saying, you shall not give your daughters as wives to their sons, nor take their daughters for your sons or for yourselves. And he's going to tell them why in a minute, but let me just say that I don't want the elders here to go around pulling out people's hair. We are in a different age and time. There's no question about that we're in a different age and time. I don't want them beating me up, and I don't want them beating you up. That's not what they're going to do. But I do want this, that when they see something wrong in my life, see something wrong in our lives, they don't hesitate to come and say, this is wrong and you need to change. I want them to say that to me because they're watching in behalf of my soul, okay? That's what I want. I want to know that they love me. I want to know that they care about me. But I want to know that when I'm messing up, they're noticing and they're not letting that pass, okay? They deal with it very directly. They seize problems by the throat, okay? That's what's happening. So here's what he says. Did not Solomon, king of Israel, sin by these things? The wisest king that Israel ever had. Yet among many nations there was no king like him who was beloved of his God, and God made him king over all Israel. Nevertheless, pagan women caused even him to sin. In other words, you think you're wiser than Solomon? Stronger than Solomon? Should we then hear of your doing all this great evil, transgressing against our God by marrying pagan women? And one of the sons of Joiada, and remember Joiada of the priestly families, the son of Eliashib, the high priest, was son-in-law of Sanballat the Horonite. Therefore I drove him from me. He said, I'm not going to let him live here. We've already said they're not going to live here. I'm driving him from me. Remember them, O my God, because they have defiled the priesthood, and the covenant of the priesthood and the Levites. Thus I cleanse them of everything pagan. I also assign duties to the priest and to the Levites, each to his service, and to bringing the wood offering and the first fruits at the appointed time. Remember me, O my God, for good. Every time he dealt with the problem, he also said he went to God in prayer. Every time he went to God in prayer. When it comes to dealing with sin in a marriage, what are you doing about it, okay? And I'm not just talking about whether you are married in an unlawful marriage. I think there's good reason for us to talk about that. I think there's good reason for us at a time later on to really talk about what do you need to do if you're married to somebody you have no right to be married to? You need to think about that. But let me just take it down to what's probably more common among us. When in a marriage there are problems that arise, what are you doing about it? Okay? What happens in too many marriages is that we just have a number of things we don't talk about anymore. And so this is an issue and we don't want to have to deal with it because it's pretty painful to deal with it. And so we just quit talking about it. And then there's another problem. We quit talking about it. And every one of those things we don't talk about becomes a rock and a wall that divides a husband and wife. Okay? It's far better when the problem presents itself, as painful as it is to deal with it. Okay? Deal with it right then. Communicate and don't refuse to communicate. And make up your mind as a couple, whatever it is that God wants us to do about this is what we're going to do. Deal with it. Take it by the throat. Well, I just realized our time is up. Okay, let me take just a minute and say that I have thoroughly enjoyed being in here with you and being in this study in Ezra and Nehemiah. I have enjoyed it, and I hope you have too. I've learned a lot as I've been studying for it, and I hope you have too. I want to remind you that starting next week, we will no longer have the 5:15 class until September. So the 5:15 will not meet again until September. Next week is the Connect Conference, and it starts at 7 o'clock. David Shannon is absolutely amazing, and you're going to love him. Some of the best speakers around are going to be coming in. This is going to be something that will be on Wednesday night, and then all day Thursday, all day Saturday, and all day Thursday, all day Friday, and all day Saturday. I may get these days in the right order eventually. But it's going to be something that you'll really enjoy. I want you to be a part of it. I think it will build you up and educate you and inspire you to want to do and be more than you are right now. And to me, that's just something really special. We've never done this before. And I will just tell you something honestly. I have no idea how this is going to go. We've never done it. While it meets in our building, other people have organized it and for us, and so we don't really know how it's going to go. We believe that we know that the speakers are going to be great. We have no idea who all is going to come. We know 55 different congregations from other states have committed to come to be with us, and so you're going to meet a lot of wonderful people while you're here. So plan on being here, okay? And the next thing I want to tell you is starting the next week on the 9th of June is going to be the beginning of our summer series. And our summer series will begin at 6:30, not at 7 o'clock, but at 6:30. And there will be a dinner each time at 5:30 before that I think you'll really enjoy. We're entitling this one, The Best Summer Ever. I don't know about you, but I've had a year and a half of COVID, and I'm really ready to celebrate something. And one of the things I'm going to celebrate is this summer. It's going to be something really, really good. I just noticed something, that all of our blue tape is off. Have you noticed that? It's off. I kind of wanted us to have a ceremony on Sunday and have everybody grab a piece of tape and just take it off and say, we're done with it. But it's off, and I'm thankful for that. I'm glad y'all have been here. Thank you for sharing this with me, and have a great summer, guys. Let's have a prayer. Father, thank you so much for Nehemiah and Ezra, for their courage, for the way they dealt with problems, and for the way you blessed them. And Father, I ask that you would help us to, in a similar way, to have courage and dedicate ourselves to knowing your will, to doing your will, and to teaching your will to the people who desperately need to know it. Help us to do that, and help us to find all that we need in you. In Jesus' name, amen. Thanks, guys.